Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 561, I Measure Every Grief I Meet. Now, in many ways, we are back to poem 252. You guys will remember when we did this one together. I can wade grief, whole pools of it. I'm used to that. But the least push of joy breaks up my feet, and I tip, drunken. Let no pebble smile, 'twas the new liquor, that was all. Power is only pain, stranded through discipline, till weights will hang, give balm to giants, and the wilt like men give Himalaya, they'll carry him. These weights we're going to come back to when we are working with one of Emily's longest poems in her collection. When this poem was published in 1896, it was actually titled Griefs, and then later published in 1947 in the New England Quarterly, volume 20. It is another comparing poem. So we've seen this from Emily a number of times, where she will compare one thing to another thing. Here, we're going to be playing the game of theodicy one more time. It is our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments where I talked about our big five in room 303. What does the text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then finally that question of theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering in this world? Why can't we live in a world without pain and suffering? And, in her word, grief, is it okay to compare griefs? In other words, your grief to my grief. She's going to ask this question. Our other assumption is that you've been following our stuff all the way through. That is to say, I'm hopeful that you've already read the previous 560 poems with us. I just finished with 560. It knew no lapse. And if you have, then you know already. I mean, we just mentioned 252. Think of the number of poems where Emily is constantly trying to work through this question of pain and suffering. One scholar has called this poem Emily's taxonomy of grief. Another scholar has said that there is almost an analytic curiosity for Emily about human suffering and pain. She is maybe our greatest poet of suffering and pain, with the exception of Dante himself. Let's enjoy the poem. I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long or did it just begin. I could not tell the date of mine. It feels so old, the pain. I wonder if it hurts to live and if they have to try, and whether could they choose between it would not be to die. I note that some, gone patient long, at length renew their smile in imitation of a light that has so little oil. I wonder if when years have piled some thousands on the harm that hurt them early, such a lapse could give them any balm. Or would they go on aching still through centuries of nerve, enlightened to a larger pain in contrast with the love? The grieved are many, I'm told. There is the various cause. Death is but one and comes but once and only nails the eyes. There's grief of want and grief of cold, or a sort they call despair. There's banishment from native eyes in sight of native air. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary, to note the fashions of the cross and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. Now, several have pointed out, this is a brilliant symphony on pain and suffering and sorrow, especially as it relates to measuring. Now, I can't help but read this and not think about Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 46. I know I have the best of time and space and was never measured and never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey all. We've given full lectures on all of the poems of the deathbed edition of Whitman's Leaves of Grass at learnstrong.net. We call that series Talks with Walt. Notice we'll start though here with measuring. I measure, she says, every grief. Grief used in 15 different poems we mentioned 252 that I meet with. How does she meet other people's pain or suffering? Narrow, probing eyes. Go back to 451 to study her use of the word eyes as we mentioned it there. And then notice the 6 I wonders. Emily is the great wanderer. She's the great curiosity wanderer. She's always thinking about, I wonder what it's like. When I see other people's pain, I measure it against my own. I wonder if the pain, notice capitalized it, weighs like mine. So notice our standards of measurement. We'll begin with weights, then we go to temporal length, and then finally to degrees of agony. It's brilliant the way she sets this up. I wonder if it weighs like mine, the comparison, or has an easier size. Now, of course, easier is a fascinating word when we're talking about weights and measurements, right? Doesn't make sense, and yet we do think about that on a job site. We'll often think about weight as being, how heavy is it? Is it easier for me to pick it up or to move it, for example, with a wheelbarrow? I think easier is a key word of this poem as well. I wonder if they bore it long, the individuals that she's maybe studying, or did it just begin? How long have they been carrying duration here? I could not tell the date of mine. It feels so old a pain. Now let's point out, as is often the case, our assumption is that Emily, the writer of this poem, is commenting on her own personal pain suffering. Again, this is usually against the rules, and we don't always identify the poet with the poem. And yet notice she says, man, I've been carrying this pain for a very long time. It's so old. Back to the next of I wonders. I wonder if the pain hurts to live, if it hurts to live, and if they have to try, and whether could they choose between, it would not be to die. In other words, I wonder if the pain is so crushing, we'll get to Calvary and crucifixion in a bit, or have they been able to bear up under it? From that, we then go to how some people have gone so long with pain and suffering, they've somehow found a way to move beyond it. I note that some, by the way, note the I note will correspond to the last stanza to note the fashions. I note that some have gone patient long. Again, our use of the dash here is brilliant. I note that some, notice capitalized, dash, gone patient long, dash. In other words, they put up with it for a long time. She's commented on her pain being a long time. Is she speaking about herself? At length, they finally renew their smile. In other words, it comes back. But an imitation of a light that has so little oil. What is she saying? In other words, the pain was great. I got through it. We can't help but think of maybe the loss of a dear pal that Emily had to kind of struggle through and with, right? And it's like, now I've come back to my smile, but it's not the same smile. The oil in the lamp is running out. She says, I wonder if when years, notice capitalized, have piled, notice we'll go from thousands to centuries here. When years have piled like weights, yes? Some thousands on the harm from the pain to the harm. That hurt them early. Notice your H sounds here. Early, such a lapse would give them any balm. In other words, is there a way? Balm of Gilead is, of course, the biblical reference here, right? Or would they go on aching still? I told you about the powerful use of her of the word still in her poems. 95 different poems. She loves this word still. T.S. Eliot learned it well. We must, what does he say in East Coker? We must be still and still moving. It's the way she uses aching still through centuries of nerve. Notice we go from thousands to centuries. Yes, centuries of nerve enlightened to a larger pain in contrast with the love. Now, the fact that she uses the word enlightened has led any number of scholars to point out that you can set Emily's poems, many of them, like this one, next to our study of Gautama Buddha and the Eightfold Path. And you'll remember that what is it that the Buddha says at the moment of his enlightenment? Notice the word. Life is what? Dukkha. Suffering. Pain. She says, I wonder if after a while, when you get to the other side, that you're capable of living even with a larger pain because of, and notice the word love is used once in this poem and it's here, the love, the grieved are many. Notice, now she'll speak in plurality. The grieved are many, dash, I am told, dash, one of the reasons why we called our series Chats with Emily. There is this kind of colloquial, almost like just a throwaway comment, I'm told. There is the various cause, notice not causes, right? Death, dash, is but one, dash, and comes but once, notice these buts, dash, and only nails the eyes. Now again, this is brilliant, takes us back to 547, you'll remember that soldier dying eye, right? In other words, it's a horrific image. So to keep the eyes shut of a corpse, they're going to put some kind of metal, a nail through the eyelids, right? Death is only one of the things that happens. There's grief of want, desire. Of course, we think about her King James reading of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, right? There's the grief of want and grief of cold. In other words, being so cold that you're freezing to death. She says, a sort, notice we're back to I am told, they call despair. Now, notice despair in quotation marks. There is a suggestion that maybe she's making fun of individuals who talk about despair but have never actually felt it. They've never really known want. They've never really known cold, right? And she'll say, there's banishment from native eyes. Notice we're back to the eyes that were nailed. From native eyes in sight of native air. Notice the second native capitalized. Some have pointed out that Emily is channeling the whole terrible grieving of native peoples. There is as well, I think, a reference possibly here to Odysseus, who is, of course, sitting on the island of Calypso. And what is it that he looks forward to or away to the oceans to? Of course, his home, Ithaca. Remember in the Odyssey, Odysseus and his men get right to Ithaca. They get to see it, and then, of course, they open up the bag of winds, and then everything goes sideways. We've given full lectures on that poem at learnstrong.net. And though I may not guess the kind, it's almost, this whole poem has been a form of guessing, right? Correctly. Yet to me, notice now we're going to get personal. A piercing comfort capitalized, it affords in passing Calvary. You'll remember Calvary when we did 553, right? One crucifixion is recorded only. How many be is not affirmed of mathematics or history. One Calvary exhibited to stranger as many be as persons, or peninsula as Gethsemane is but a province in the being center. Judea for journey or crusades achieving too near. Our Lord indeed made compound witness, and yet there's nearer crucifixion than that. As we commented, the idea that she seems to almost reduce the importance of Calvary because we all have our own form of crucifixion. Here now back to comparing. In other words, when you compare Christ's crucifixion at Calvary, it kind of makes all other pain seem a little bit less powerful, right? To note the fashions, we're back to I know, the fashions of the cross. Only Emily could come up with a line like that. To note the fashions of the cross and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume, when we get to 696, it'll be acres of perhaps here, that some are like my own. Now, you'll remember 532, when we did that poem, and I can't help but come back to this one. I tried to think a lonelier thing than any I'd seen, some polar expiation, an omen in the bone of death's tremendous nearness. I probed retrieveless things, my duplicate to borrow. A haggard comfort springs from the belief that somewhere within the clutch of thought there dwells one other creature of heavenly love forgot. Of course, the word love here he also mentioned. By the way, in both poems capitalized. I plucked at our partition as one would pry the walls between himself and horrors twin within opposing selves. I almost strove to clasp his hand. Such luxury grew that as myself could pity him, perhaps he pitied me. Again, we're going from myself to my own. When we get to poem 1670 at the end of our study, we'll come back to this poem. She says it this way. In winter, another one of her longest poems. In winter in my room, I came upon a worm, pink, lank, and warm. And as he was a worm, and worms presume not quite with him at home, secured him by a string to something neighboring and went along. A trifle afterward a thing occurred. I'd not believed it if I heard, but staked with creeping blood, a snake with motils rare, surveyed my chamber floor, in feature as the worm before, but ringed with power the very string with which I tied him to. When he was mean and knew that string was there, I shrank. How far you are, propitiation's claw. Afraid, he hissed of me. No cordiality, he fathomed me. Notice this word fathom. We'll come back to this poem, this idea of wonder. Fathomed me then to a rhythm slim, secreted in his form as pattern swim, projected him. That time I flew both eyes his way. Notice we're getting to eyes. Lest he pursue, nor yet cease to run, till in a distant town, towns on from mine, I set me down. This was a dream. There is a dreamlike quality, I think, as well in this poem. At 2a, I think the message here is it's hard to compare suffering, right? Because the suffering we know is the suffering that is ours. At 2b, all of the alliterations that's here with wonder, ways in stanza 1, some smile, long, length, light in stanza 4, harm, hurt, stanza 5, kind, correctly, comfort, Calvary, cross, piercing, passing in stanzas 9, 10. There is some assonance as well, measure, every, and grief, meet in stanza 1, hurt early in stanza 5, but one comes, but once in stanza 7. The consonants, can you hear it, of measure, every, grief, narrow, probing, and measure, eyes, ways, has, easier size in stanza 1. Comfort, affords, fashions, fascinated, as well as presumes, some, my in stanzas 9 and 10. Emily's on her game, obviously, here in every way. Finally, at 3a, some have seen some association with George Herbert's The Sacrifice. I'll let you run that to ground. I can't help but think of Auden's Musée de Beaux Arts about suffering. They were never wrong, the old masters. How we're only interested in our own suffering and our own pain. Finally, to own a poem like this at 3b, what's the worst suffering that you ever had to endure? And what was a time when you compared pain and suffering? And how did that go for you? I hope Emily's challenging you. Thank you.